Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. A secret sixth thing? These are known as the stages of grief. Denial is the immeasurable disbelief you feel upon experiencing something that causes grief. Anger is, well, anger. It can show up in a lot of forms and it doesn't really follow any rules. Bargaining is wishing you could change things, trying to fix the situation or the feeling that it should have been me. Depression is a lot more than sadness, especially in relation to grief. It's a loss of interest in things you normally enjoy, it's brain fog, it's exhaustion, and it's a lot of other things we'll get into a little later on. Acceptance is finally understanding the reality of the situation and opening up space to be able to move on. It's not necessarily resolution, it's just processing. What was that about a sixth thing? Confusion. This isn't necessarily a traditionally recognized stage, but it's something that I have gained through my own experience, and I think it's something that's not talked about a whole lot. Grief is weird. Let's get into it, shall we? The American Psychological Association defines grief as the anguish experienced after significant loss, usually the death of a beloved person. It also says, grief often includes physiological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, and apprehension about the future. Intense grief can become life-threatening through disruption of the immune system, self-neglect, and suicidal thoughts. And this is where all of that fun, dizzying weirdness lives. Before we get too deep into the weeds, I would like to set the stage for what actually caused me to want to make this video in the first place. I'll be using this as the example throughout the entire video, so pay attention. No sleeping in class. I'm gonna be as vulnerable and squishy as Mr. Krabs here without his shell, so please be nice and empathetic. I am scared. In 2023, I entered what I like to call the chaos spiral. Long story short-ish, I was living in Los Angeles from 2019 to 2024, and I was pursuing fine art painting with the white-hot passion of 1,000 Sabrina Carpenters. I worked as an art director in-house for a company for the last of those 3 years, and in my free time, I was chasing my dream as hard as I possibly could. I was making paintings, going to art shows, assisting a professional, real, actual artist, making Instagram reels, networking, going to art show openings, yada, yada, yada. My whole life was work and art. All my relationships were also around work and art. And in 2023, I decided to stop doing that. It's kind of a long story, but like essentially I just fell out of love with it and decided it wasn't for me anymore. I had been feeling this way for about a year, but I was in denial because I had committed my whole life to it and I was working really hard at it all the time in all of my free time. It was where all of my energy and effort and money went, and it was everything I paid attention to and blah, 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 whatever, you get it. I decided I just kind of wanted to live my life and enjoy it for a little while. I had a good job. I was living in the city of my dreams. I was living in the neighborhood of my dreams. I just wanted to take some time to enjoy myself. As a teenager and in my early 20s, all I wanted to do was be a successful art director in Los Angeles. And I had never given myself the chance to like enjoy that and just like be present. Ambition is my curse. Please free me from these chains. I am so tired. Anyways, because I had been used to having my brain occupied literally all of the time, I found myself with nothing to do for 50% of my waking life. And because I was so used to stress and being focused on something, my brain decided to focus on the noise of my neighbor talking on the phone all day, every day. And I had never heard it before. And I ended up developing a very harmful toxic fixation on noise. Because of course it did, and I don't know why I expected anything less. Turns out when stress is your baseline, your brain finds things to stress about when you don't have any stress. My neuroses have neuroses. This devolved into pretty much a psychotic break in which I knew that for my safety and my sanity, I would have to move to a new apartment to try to heal myself from the newly discovered anxiety disorder I developed. And what do you know? It didn't work. Crazy. The next apartment was even noisier because there were about 80,000 fucking motorcycles all day, every day, and the 60-year-old windows didn't close, and it was about half the size of my last place for the same goddamn price. I'm still bitter about it, can you tell? So, expectedly, my noise trauma got considerably worse, and I got to a point that was so bad that my parents were literally begging me to check into a hospital. I was literally, not exaggerating here, having a panic attack once a day, at least every day for weeks. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. And then, as fate would have it, a few weeks after moving into this new, smaller, shittier apartment, I lost said job. Go figure. I felt like I was on the Truman Show, but like a much more sadistic and upsetting version.
Look what I got free at the checkout. It's a
crippling trauma.
So at this point, I was living in a tiny, shitty little box that I hated, and I wanted to rip my arms off and use them as pool floaties. I had no sense of purpose or direction that was sending me into a black hole of an identity crisis, and I had no income. Needless to say, pretty fucked. Eventually, enough became enough, and I had to make the incredibly difficult decision to break my lease and move back home to Ohio to try to heal myself of the noise trauma, the identity crisis, and the topic of this video that I didn't know was gonna happen. the grief. When the APA says significant loss, me losing LA fits right into that description. Los Angeles is my favorite place in the world. It was a place I felt endless wonder and excitement. I was so actively, incredibly grateful to live there, and I will be moving back there the moment I'm able to. This was like losing a loved one. In fact, the first video on this channel is a goodbye/breakup letter I wrote that my therapist suggested I do, and I used a bunch of clips of my memories and my time there. LA is a very special place to me. You can go watch that if you would like. It means a lot to me. But beyond just losing Los Angeles, I lost my identity and my sanity. I felt like I was in a fucking funhouse, except the music was steadily getting louder and it was on repeat, but the repeat was on a downbeat, so it was like super obvious, and all of the mirrors were distorting things, and the lights were bright red, and it was giving me a headache. And there were too many clowns doing that stupid fucking laugh about 4 inches from my face 24/7, 7 days a week for about 6 months straight. I was suffocating. I was ready for the big nap. Lights out, dunzo, goodbye. It was by far the hardest, most traumatic thing I have ever been through, and the grief it's left me with has dug a hole through my chest. Okay, now that my self-indulgent little story time is over, let's talk about the other stuff, yeah? The first major thing I learned through this experience is that grief is not linear. We're kind of sold the idea that we go through grief stage by stage, one at a time, in order. I, for one, experienced them all together sometimes, but isolated and at random other times sometimes, and it was exhausting. It's an emotional roller coaster that makes the Millennium Force feel like a lazy river. I was not equipped for this in the slightest. It's not that I had never experienced grief before. I have, like a lot of other times, but it's more that I was never really aware of what it was, or what to expect during it. I tend to hold myself to a pretty unrealistically high standard, and I long held the belief that I had to be strong in the face of adversity and not give it too much power over me. So I had never really been able to admit that I was grieving before, nor did I know what grief should really look like. Even when my best friend died a few years ago, I was sad and a little shocked at first, but I didn't give myself the space to actually grieve, because I felt like I didn't deserve to label it like that when other people were closer to him. I know it's not good. It was actually my therapist that pointed out that what I had gone through in the last 1.5 years was grief. I didn't really get it or buy it. In my mind, nobody died. I wasn't experiencing what I thought were the stages of grief in the way that I knew them to be. And overall, it just kind of felt like a ridiculous thing to call grief, or even to be hurt by in general.
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! It's just a flesh wound.
But my therapist gave me the permission to call it grief. I find that anytime my therapist is able to label something for me, I'm much more able to accept it, because she's like a doctor. Getting a real legit professional that knows their shit to call out this kind of stuff for me and give it a label is very helpful for me, because otherwise I would just consistently downplay it and be a more toxic person than Chernobyl. What surprised me the most was that grief was completely nonlinear and very abstract. I never claimed to be smart. It gets weird, confusing, and pretty heady. Denial. When I went through all of this, there was a lot to grieve. There was the loss of the home I loved, the loss of the way my hearing used to be, the loss of my job, the loss of my social life, the loss of my identity, and finally, the loss of Los Angeles. In the denial stage, there's both a difficulty to accept and understand the loss, and it's both conscious and unconscious, and when talking about unconscious, I'm just kind of... So here's the thing about denial. It's not necessarily conscious denial of the loss. It can be, but it can also be that feeling that it just hasn't quite hit yet, you know? Like when something really bad happens, you have that weird feeling that everything is still kind of normal. You knew it happened, but something's wrong. You know when you get punched in the head and it takes kind of a second to actually hurt? No? No? No one else? Just me? Well, it's like that, kinda. The easiest example for me in all of this is losing my job, but it will get more abstract as it goes, because I want to relate to anything you might be going through as well. When I got that call that I was laid off, it didn't register entirely. I knew it was bad, and I immediately went into fix the issue mode, but I didn't have this overwhelming sense of sadness or, I wasn't super depressed about it yet. Really, I was almost in shock. I didn't see it coming at all. I was an integral part of the team, and I had been there for 3 years. I had survived several rounds of layoffs at this point. It was basically 2 weeks of living in this half-belief state. I knew I needed to take time to try to find a new job, but I also kind of felt like I was gonna wake up the next morning and just go back to work, like everything was normal. This was definitely the first stage for me, but this is the only time that it would line up with the traditional sequence of grief. Denial can also be the state of disbelief. When I was dealing with the noise trauma, I just couldn't believe that a terrible thing like that happened to me. Looking at it from the outside in, I felt kind of ridiculous. I was having panic attacks because of noise. It felt so dumb. I think we all kind of generally live with the assumption on the day-to-day that we're just gonna be like mostly fine throughout our lives. We can't even fathom some of the shit that we're gonna go through. We just don't expect that it's gonna happen. There is no way I could have possibly predicted such a terrifying, insane spiral out of control. Hey man, just so you know, you're gonna go through a wacky little experience that's gonna fundamentally change the way you perceive the world, and it's gonna be so awful you're gonna feel like you're being tortured by the CIA in your dreams, but it'll all be real. What the fuck? What do you mean? Who are you? How did you get in here? Oh, you're gonna hear your neighbor talking on the phone so much that it's gonna send you into a spiral so bad that you feel like a crazy person in a movie. I'd suggest buying a stethoscope now, otherwise you're gonna hurt your neck putting your ear to the ceiling. What the fuck are you talking about? And how did you get in here? Yeah, don't worry about that. You're gonna be really scared of noise for about like a year and a half. Noise? What the fuck? Oh yeah, like all of it. Elevator music, piercingly loud. Car engines, those are fun. It's kind of like having spidey senses, but it's gonna crush you instead of being helpful. What? Okay, whatever's going on here, I need you to leave. Oh yeah, one more thing. Earplugs don't really work that well, so good luck with that. You wanna tell me I'm gonna be afraid of noise? Like just regular noise, not explosions or screaming or anything. Just noise, just regular, normal ass noise. Yep, and you're gonna be real self-conscious about it. Can I have some of that? Get out! Denial can also be a longing for the way things once were. And this is where it gets really weird. To this day, I still sometimes find myself thinking, oh, you know what sounds like a good idea? Going to
insert restaurant name here.
Dinner tonight. Oh, wait, I can't do that. Or even something more mundane. I was driving home from a grocery store a couple weeks ago, and for some reason, I felt like I was in this intersection under an overpass outside of the north end of downtown Los Angeles. It was just a corner street. I had only been there like 3 times, and I was just driving home here and was like, oh, nope. Weird, very weird. Fucking can't even remember to grab my wallet half the time, but I can remember a dingy overpass that I had passed like twice a couple years ago. I don't know. The flashbacks and memories of my time in Los Angeles or all the time I spent painting or whatever aren't like these like sharp stings for a moment. Instead, they're like these random soft intrusions of memories of a time I wish I could get back. They're not triggered by anything in particular. They just happen. Sometimes I'll just be laying on my couch here and find myself feeling like I'm in my apartment in West Hollywood. It's just very odd. Denial isn't just not accepting or believing. It's a lot of different things. It's shock, numbness, disbelief, fogginess, forgetting it ever happened, distracting yourself, daydreaming, longing, intrusive memories, self-judgment and criticism. It's, as you will learn with a lot of these things, a lot of different things, and it can intermix with all the other things. So why do we face denial? Because we're in Egypt, duh.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
All right. Denial is essentially our brain's way of beginning processing. It compartmentalizes the loss and allows only a little bit of it through at a time so that we can process it slowly and in a way that won't kill us. It doesn't feel like it does a great job at that, but I guess we'll never know the alternative. That feeling of forgetting it happened or disbelief is your brain's way of kind of IV dripping it to you so that you can process it a little slower instead of blunt force trauma-ing its way into your brain. So ultimately, it's a good thing even if it feels a little squiggly, wet, and gross. Anger. Anger is obvious, but it's not just like blind roid rage.
Like all I feel is rage.
It can come out directly, like being mad at the situation or person or thing or whatever around it, or it can come out sideways, like general irritability, pessimism, impatience, a lot of other stuff. I am such a cynical and resentful person by nature that this level of cynicism and resentment was kind of hard for me to differentiate between my normal insufferableness. When you're already a petulant little man-child with a 2mm fuse, you're pretty used to a stoplight taking a second too long, sending you off the handle. So it's kind of hard to line up what's a normal amount of being a diva and what's like an excessive amount of being a diva. Anger is considered to be a secondary emotion, according to Verywell Mind, wherein they say there are other emotions that haven't been explored or allowed to exist. For example, someone might feel abandoned, disappointed, fearful, depressed, helpless, etc., and anger is the way that those emotions are channeled. Back in my example, I felt a lot of anger, and I felt it most of the time. I felt like Alex Jones on a bad day, but without all the weirdo right-wing conspiracy shit.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
I felt it in all the ways. I was furious at my property managers for not taking all of the noise and safety complaints seriously, ever. Like, not once, at all, once, not. It was ridiculous. I was resentful of the neighbor I was hearing all the time. For like a lot of reasons beyond this, but primarily this. I was pessimistic about my future, feeling like because I had lost my passion for art, I would never find a new passion again. And I was mad at whatever forces out there caused it. I was mad at upper management in my job for laying out roll-offs. Fuck me. I was mad at upper management in my job for rolling out layoffs in the way that they did. I was explosive. I had a hard time containing my rage. All I wanted to do when I had an episode was break everything in sight. In fact, there were a number of times I would just go for a drive so I could scream bloody murder at the top of my lungs without bothering anybody. I was overwhelmed by the thought of how unfair everything was. How insane it was that I had to go through everything. How insane it was that I had to go through everything the way I did for the amount of time that I did. Like explosive dominoes made of C4. Thankfully, I guess, I wasn't really talking to anyone through all of this. Not, thankfully, it's not a good thing. Don't do that. You should definitely seek help and talk to your friends when you're having a hard time. But I didn't have the ability to like explode on anybody or take out my anger on someone unfairly. So that's the silver lining, I guess. Misdirected anger is a common symptom of grief-related anger. You may start lashing out at people for no discernible reason, or find that your patience is incredibly thin and you're losing it very quickly. What's so weird about the anger, to me, is that it can kind of just happen at any time, whether the other stages are present or not, and there doesn't necessarily have to be a trigger for it. It just kind of exists in the background. You're just mad a lot. You just feel angry, and you don't know why. You don't really connect the dots that it's in line with your grief, because anger can be so misdirected and explosive and random, it feel like it's just people pissing you off, or like you were born on a broken mirror under a ladder in a room full of black cats. Kind of like the way I was born. There was one distinct day that I was walking to the grocery store because I wanted to get some snacks and watch YouTube videos for the rest of the night to forget about how shitty my life had gotten. And when I got there, there were 5 different homeless people and a ton of cops and a bunch of managers at the grocery store being all high tension, trying to deal with a bunch of different situations because all of them were different. It wasn't 5 people together, it was 5 different things. And I almost got hit by a car in the parking lot. And it was just so awful, I wanted to walk into the store and throw elbows at everybody and catch a felony. I didn't, just to be clear. Instead, I went home and ate my snacks on my couch and cried. I wasn't really thinking of the unfairness of my situation. I was just furious that I couldn't even get 15 minutes of peace. My blood was hot. Anger does have a utility. Again, one that feels like it could use a bit of fine tuning, but a utility no less. The purpose of anger is to keep us alert in the face of a threat. It's largely rooted in fairness in our brains and towards things that we have strong attachments to. It acts as sort of an emergency backup to keep the self safe. While you may never have any real survival danger when you're grieving, you're actually just a monkey that ate too many mushrooms 2 million years ago. Monkey brain say thing wrong. Thing want to kill. Therefore, thing must die before you. It's trying to keep you protected and able to respond immediately. Monkey no, neighbor next door on phone, not leopard trying to eat face. Apparently neither do far-right weirdos. Sorry. Bargaining. Bargaining, my amorphous little worm. You baffle me. Truly. A lot of people interpret the concept of bargaining as like praying at night, saying that you'll go to church every single Sunday from now on if God will just bring back your loved one or restore the situation to what it once was. And in some cases, this is true. It's not uncommon to try to think of any compromise that you can possibly make in order to alleviate your suffering. You may find yourself literally begging to a God you don't believe in just to make things the way they were again. You may not even ask for that. You may just want things to feel okay again. But just like the rest of the stages, there's more to bargaining than just a Sunday flea market. Bargaining can also be guilt or shame for the way that you feel. Weird, right? It can be insecurity or anxiety. It can be thinking in spirals about the way things were or what could have been or should have been. It can be self-blame. Whoo boy. Beating yourself up, assuming the worst, comparing your situation to others, judging others, thinking of all of the what ifs in the universe. Bargaining is, in my opinion, the weirdest stage. And like the other stages, it can happen at any point, anytime, whenever it wants, with or without the other stages, day to day completely differently, and seemingly out of nowhere. One day you may find yourself praying to Xenu in tongues, and the next day you may be finding yourself writing a manifesto about all of the things you would do differently if you could go back in time and try to fix it. The weirdest part for me was just how long it lasted. Not all too long ago, maybe like 4 months or so, my therapist and I were working on all of the insane ways that I carry self-judgment. I've been called too sensitive my whole life, and I think maybe you're not sensitive enough, but this video is not towards my high school bullies. I'm not projecting, you're projecting. This label has always kind of stuck with me. I am really sensitive, but I've always felt wrong for it because it's always too sensitive, not more sensitive. So pair that belief with this Long Island iced tea of traumas and losses, and you get yourself a shotgun wound in your fucking psyche. My therapist asked me to take some time in between sessions to really explore all of this self-judgment, to figure out what it's all about and what it's saying to me. What I found was harrowing, to say the least. I had been feeling like I should have done more to try to stay in LA. And remember, this is 8 months past me coming home. Shit takes a while. I told myself I should have addressed the noise issue as soon as it happened, because if I had, maybe I'd have taken the job search a little bit more seriously, because I felt like I had something to fight for instead of becoming Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind trying to find all of the voices in my walls. I got upset with myself for not trying to find things that might make my situation a little easier, like taking a class or trying to meet new friends or taking my situation more seriously or applying for jobs better. I was upset with myself for isolating without meaning to and damaging relationships because I had effectively just dropped off the face of the earth without telling anybody. And I was afraid of saying anything to anyone about what I was going through because I was afraid of being judged. I really, really hurt some people by doing that. And of course, my fears couldn't have been further from the truth. They were my best friends. I felt guilty, like I had let myself down for not taking the job search more seriously. I thought I should have been writing real cover letters more and treating my job search like a full-time job while I had the time available. But instead, I was spending all of my time trying to find any easy source of dopamine I possibly could so I wouldn't end up on the 11 o'clock news. I was beating myself up for all of the things that I didn't do to try to make my situation better, and I was completely unable to accept the fact that I was literally incapacitated and could not have done more than I did. To me, I was able-bodied and conscious, so I should have been able to do a lot more to try to turn shit around. But the reality was my brain was melting itself into a pile of hot gum. I brought all of this to my therapist, and she pointed out that this was bargaining. I didn't really understand how until she explained all of the forms that bargaining takes and how often it can take the longest to get through because of its tendrils in every nook and cranny of your psyche nature. But what she did next is what really brought it home for me. She told me to write what it would look like if I wasn't able-bodied and conscious. If I did, in fact, meet my criteria for incapacitated and unable to do more. And whoo boy, did someone turn the lights off in here? Because it got real dark. What I found wasn't empathy for myself. It wasn't a realistic understanding of where I truly was. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even a humorous, self-deprecating portrait of my past self. What I found was more self-judgment, but this time on Dark Souls difficulty. I was finding myself saying I still didn't try enough. I wasn't physically incapacitated in the way that I'd need to be for it to be an excuse, and I couldn't pretend or put myself in the mindset that I actually was, even for the sake of this exercise. So even if things got worse, there were still things I could have done to fix my situation. If I wasn't able to keep paying my internet or phone bill, I could have gone to the library and used their computers to fill out job applications. If I got evicted, I could have lived in my car and showered at the beach. I could have sold all of my belongings to pay for my phone bill and rent for a little bit longer. I could have been way more aggressive with trying to get a job by just going to offices pretending I had a meeting. I could have stood on a corner handing out resumes. You get it. Instead of being like, okay, I'm completely incapacitated and coming home was a very valid choice, I just kept pushing the line of what being okay to make that choice was. I found at the base of everything that unless I was facing literal death, coming home was a weak choice. Never minding the fact that I was on the phone crying to my mom every single day and literally suicidal for weeks on end. Forget that I had noise-canceling headphones in 24/7 and that the music in the Target elevator felt like putting my head inside of the speaker at a goddamn rave. It didn't matter that I hadn't seen a friend in months to talk to or be hugged by. I could have done more. When I brought this up to my therapist the next week, I knew it was unreasonable. I knew I was out of touch and completely lost my grip on reality, but I held myself to such an impossible standard that I couldn't help but feel this this way. I couldn't accept my reality. I couldn't allow myself to make smart choices. I had to hold on to what I knew at all costs. I was finding any way to keep things as they were. I wasn't literally begging an outside force to fix things for me anymore, but I was absolutely blaming myself and facing a ton of guilt for not working harder to fix my situation and get things back to the way they once were. Turns out bargaining is real strange and I don't understand it. We bargain in all of these ways in a way to almost gaslight ourselves into thinking that things can go back in time and go back to the way they once were. We desperately want to live our lives the way they were before the tragedy, and we'll do anything it takes to get it back there. We make these what-if situations as a way of convincing ourselves that there's a way to go back in time and fix things, even though we consciously know that we can't do that. Bargaining is a defense against the feelings of helplessness experienced after a loss. It happens when people struggle to accept the reality of the loss and the limits of their control of the situation. Bargaining acts as a sort of buffer to our minds. Similar to denial, it's meant to help us slowly process our grief instead of being hit with it all at once. It gives us a false sense of control and acts as sort of a valve into how much we process at a time. We work to gain control of our inner narrative and to begin coming to terms with reality. We also often use bargaining as a way to try to remove the guilt from the situation. Unlike denial, bargaining understands that the loss had happened. It says, okay, I've suffered this tremendous thing, but maybe I can undo it. In some ways, bargaining is almost a step closer to acceptance, because instead of dissociating with it or straight up forgetting, we know that it happened. We just want to fix it. Depression. Raise your hand if you're depressed. Yeah, well, this is different. If you raised your hand just now, you know that clinical depression is a formless smoke monster all of its own with so many misconceptions around it that I could make an entire video series about it on its own. The everyday clinical depression behemoth is a big pre-chewed gumwad of symptoms that stretch far beyond just sadness. Depression and grief hits different. It's like the McDonald's Sprite of mental health crises. The symptoms are pretty similar, but the circumstances and ways that they exhibit themselves are a unique type of awful. Of course, there's sadness, there's crying, there's missing the person, place, or thing that you lost, but there's a whole lot more. A la the title of this video, it gets a whole lot weirder. Depression can be numbness, indescribable emptiness, feeling overwhelmed by everyday life stuff, bouts of sheer despair, severe fatigue and brain fog, every little thing reminding you of the loss of interest in things you normally like, crying, feeling alone in your loss, like literally nobody else could possibly understand, isolating yourself from your loved ones because you feel like you're gonna be a burden or you can't handle trying to be okay around them. The depression is kind of where the real processing happens. It's what gets through those denial and bargaining valves and into your amygdala. This is the realizing the reality and coming to terms with the loss. But remember, I don't know how you'd forget at this point. These symptoms don't follow any like real timeline and they can happen whenever they want and at the same time as each other, so it gets confusing. It gets even harder when you're already clinically depressed. You're used to the random bouts of sadness and the general exhaustion of like being alive, but when the depression of grief comes, you feel all of those symptoms very different and at the same time as the normal ones. For me, depression was probably the most common symptom of my chaos spiral. It was like living with a weight on my chest. I physically could not stand up straight because it felt like something was pushing me down. It felt like I had gotten hit with sudden bad news. All of the time. I could barely ever get out of bed or off the couch, more than usual. In my instance, I had already been grappling with an identity crisis before losing my job or having to move home, so I didn't really need more of a dog pile of shit on top of me, but here we are, I guess. Letting go of the thing that I associated with my identity, painting, caused me to enter this weird limbo phase that hit at the same time as my noise sensitivity started. That was probably the cause of it. I felt like my soul was floating in a sensory deprivation tank, but the lock was stuck and it wasn't peaceful even a little bit. This caused a lot of strife for me, and coupling it with the immeasurable stress and fear the noise trauma was giving me, I lost my enjoyment of everything and completely, accidentally isolated myself from most of my life and my friends and my family and my loved ones. So when I lost my job a few months later, every last little shred of coping mechanism I had, gone out the window, bye. I no longer enjoyed escaping into silly YouTube videos. I could barely touch my Xbox controller. Nothing called to me. My first response to bad situations is to immediately try and solve them. So I just went straight into problem solving mode. Problem was the depression from the giant ball of horse shit that was dropped on me caused a brain fog thicker than Silent Hill, so I couldn't get myself to focus on fucking anything except for lazing out and phoning it in on a couple of LinkedIn Easy Apply applications a day. I was so desperate for any ounce of relief that I ended up just binge eating junk food and developing a considerably worse social media addiction than I already had. Never did catch that dragon. The depression was so thick and palpable that I needed absolutely anything I possibly could to distract me from it, and the normal stuff just wasn't hitting anymore. It was like I had an RFK brainworm, but instead of making me an insufferable piece of shit, it just sucked all of the dopamine and serotonin out of my brain before it could get to the receptors. Then, as I made the decision to move home, the depression from the grief got a whole lot weirder. Being back home has been good for me. It was immediately helpful, but boy, if I didn't go through another crisis inside of my currently existing crisis. I, again, barely left my bed. I was crying randomly all the time, and I could not possibly imagine a better future for myself. My demeanor was completely nuked. I was quiet, exhausted, had very little to say, and just felt crushed. It was a serious challenge to get any work done or do anything I liked. All I could think about was how unfair everything that happened to me was and how much I missed LA. I couldn't imagine anything getting better. It was just this deep, bleak, black abyss, and it didn't even stare back. I pretty openly hate Cleveland, and the prospect of having to get back on my feet here felt like a death sentence. There were no places I wanted to live, and I couldn't possibly imagine myself getting better here, of all places. My friends make fun of me and say it's the most pop punk trait about me, because I hate my hometown. The depression that comes from grief can oftentimes feel like the longest symptom, and sometimes it can even supersede acceptance. We can think back on a loss years in the future and be stricken with a very similar feeling of sadness and hopelessness by that memory, albeit generally speaking, for a shorter amount of time. There is ongoing research that suggests that grief can cause a form of clinical depression, but like I mentioned earlier, besides that, it is important to realize that the depression is largely the processing. Denial and bargaining siphon in depression slowly, so you can process it methodically and not be completely overwhelmed and killed by it. The depression is the brain saying, this is real, this hurts, and I need to figure it out. Acceptance. Anyone else here ever think acceptance meant being over it? Yeah, same. It doesn't. A lot of the time when we think of acceptance, we think of moving on. Acknowledging that a thing happened, but no longer being affected by it. Oh, baby girl, that could not be further from the truth. Acceptance doesn't mean that you feel happy about the loss. Rather, in this stage, there is finally an acceptance of the pain and loss you experienced, and you start to look forward to and plan for the future, says Sarah Gundel, a clinical psychologist with a private practice in New York City. This stage is about accepting the fact that there is a new reality that cannot be changed and figuring out how the new reality will impact your life, relationships, and trajectory. Confused? Yeah, me too. Acceptance isn't so much moving on. Acceptance isn't so much moving on as it is more so the absence of the other stages. But again, nothing happens in order and everything is annoying. Think of it like this. You experience a loss that totally shakes up your world. You get front-loaded with all of these stages and symptoms. Sometimes there's even a little bit of a dead zone between the loss and the feelings where you don't actually react at all. This would technically be denial, but let's call it initial shock. These symptoms bounce around for a long time like out-of-control bumper cars with no rails and pumped full of nitrous, and for some reason nobody has thought to close the amusement park, some of them at the same times as each other, sometimes one at a time, and sometimes you're okay and can get a couple hours without them. As you move through these symptoms and feelings, they kind of start to spread out more. Maybe one day you mostly feel anger and depression, but because of the nature of the loss, there's some space for processing. This space is where acceptance begins to wriggle its way in. It may only be for a half hour at a time, maybe more, maybe less, but it starts to pop in there here and there. As the timeline goes on, the acceptance starts to show up more and more. Maybe a few months have gone by and you're left with mostly just the depression, really missing the person that you lost and remembering all of the good times that you would dress up as Teletubbies and slide down a hill covered in motor oil, missing them a bunch and feeling really tired and sad. But at the same time, you're understanding that they really are gone. The acceptance is kind of around the same amount of time as the depression. You don't really feel better, but you're able to go about your life with a little bit more emotional stability again. You can get through a workday completely fine, and getting your oil changed in your car doesn't send you through an emotional breakdown anymore. You see some memes that you think the person would find funny and makes you sad, but you know they're gone, and you're able to find the meme funny for yourself too, and just send it to someone else. The longer this goes, the smaller the depression is, and the more present the acceptance becomes. You know they're gone, and it does bum you out when you think about it, but you know tomorrow will come, and you know something will make you laugh and bring you joy soon enough. Acceptance isn't being over it, it's just knowing it happened, and knowing life moves on, and you can live a new version. I didn't find acceptance for like a long time. To be honest, it's been a year and a half since my chaos spiral, and I sometimes still don't feel like I have fully accepted it. I've been back in Cleveland for a year now, and I still find myself meandering through a little bit of denial and bargaining from time to time. I've mostly accepted it, but that doesn't stop me from grieving here and there. And that's the thing, it's not linear, and it can take a really, really long time. A really, 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 really long time. I've resolved my noise trauma, but I still pretty regularly grieve the loss of LA. That's what acceptance looks like. It's not the absence of pain or fully moving on. Acceptance is understanding the reality of the situation, finding a new way to live life, and being able to find hope for the future again. Slowly, your interests come back. You begin to feel more energy for life, and you start to feel ready to take some risks again. You want to move forward. Not move on, but move forward. Secret sixth thing? Okay, this isn't like a real stage, but it's something that I found myself experiencing a whole hell of a lot, so just like follow me along here because it's kind of the thesis of the whole video. Grief is messy, it's abstract, and it's confusing. If you're not particularly well versed with it, for starters, consider yourself lucky, but you might have these preconceived notions of how it's supposed to go. This is so stupid and like low-key embarrassing, but there was this episode of The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy where Billy goes through all the stages of grief one at a time, and I, as a child, thought that that was like literally how grief worked. Like, not obviously it was a cartoon and it was a joke and silly, but like it made me think that grief was like one at a time, each stage, and then it was over.
He's going through the 7 stages of grief. Shock.
How could this happen?
Denial.
It's a mistake. No way this could happen.
Bargaining.
It's okay. It's okay. Maybe I can fix it.
Fear.
There's no way I can fix it.
Anger.
I'm gonna pull Boogie's nose off and put it in a jar.
Despair.
And when I'm done with Boogie, I'm coming for you, little pukes.
He's stuck on anger.
But as we've talked about ad nauseum, we know that that just ain't true, girly pop. The confusion comes, or came for me at least, as this intense feeling of like surprise in a way. Also that. I couldn't believe just how out of control and all over the place my feelings were. Every day it was something relatively different. I didn't understand that the feelings I was having and the thoughts that I was having were all related to each other and parts of grief. I didn't know that all of the symptoms and stages could happen out of order and at the same time as each other. I didn't actually learn that until a few months into being home. I'm a 30-year-old man, but learning that made it all finally click, and it all became a lot easier to work with. Until then, I was just constantly alarmed at how I felt. There was seemingly no rhyme or reason to any of it. Obviously, there was the circumstance I'd found myself in, but I thought like a lot of what I was experiencing was because of the trauma that I had been through, or like hardwiring in my belief system from my whole life. I didn't realize that these were symptoms of grief. In my mind, I had been through grief before. There was no way that's what this was. I was just going nuts. I've been through traumatic breakups. I've had best friends die. I've lost jobs. I've been through dead pets, and none of it ever hurt as bad as this did. I still don't fully know if I just wasn't emotionally in tune enough during all of those other things to know that that's what was going on. But I couldn't help like feeling like if losing someone incredibly close to me suddenly didn't send me through this amount of pain and torment, then this certainly could not have been grief. The feeling of what the fuck is happening to me lasted for months until I got clarity from my therapist. For the first week of losing my job, I woke up every day feeling like I was just on a vacation or something. But then I'd quickly remember what happened and become like super disoriented. The fact that like the reality took so long to set in with all of these things felt incredibly strange. If you've ever had a concussion, it felt like that. If you haven't had a concussion, consider yourself lucky again. But it's kind of like you're halfway between dreaming and being awake, but everything processes way slower and you like forget stuff, and sometimes your senses just like stop working. I had a concussion 7 years ago, and when I was in college, I was having a conversation with my professor, and midway through it, I just stopped and like forgot that it ever happened.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting how yellow is a color we can see. Yeah, isn't that great? We even have these receptors in our eyes that let us see green and blue and red and all sorts of other ones. Austin? Hello? Hello? Huh?
This confusion almost acts as a container for all of the other symptoms. It's wrapped around them like a cloth, and it creates this weird foggy film on top of everything. You wonder why you feel so weird all the time, what all of this back and forth is. You may even feel like you're developing bipolar disorder. I did. There's also something called complicated grief, which is extended grief that goes far beyond the normal expected bounds of grief. And it's typically experienced as like losing yourself, or feeling like a part of you has died with the deceased or left with the thing that you left. This study frames it particularly as the loss of a loved one, but I would reckon that it goes for any other form of grief too. I absolutely felt like I'd lost my former self. like I'd never be the same. To some degree, I was right. I'm a lot more soft-spoken now in most instances. I don't ever really have too much to say, and I find myself fairly flat in the way I exhibit my emotions. I still feel everything as strong as ever, but now I don't show it nearly as much. Hello, except for when he does that. Oh my goodness. I also don't really know, like, who I am still, but that's a whole other can of baloney. The aforementioned study says, according to this model, individuals whose goals and plans were closely intertwined with their relationship to the deceased and for whom the deceased was a primary attachment figure are most at risk for CG. While I didn't lose a loved person, I lost a loved life. I had so many plans and dreams and goals built solely around being an artist in LA. With that connection severed, I completely fell apart and had to watch those goals and plans die with it. There was already a festering identity crisis from leaving painting in my past, and this climax of hell events rocket shitted. You rocket shit. Your shit smells like rocket fuel. Good lord. This situation of hell events just fucking rocket shipped that shit into orbit. I didn't know who I was, what I liked, what my value to the world was, where I wanted to go, or anything about myself, and I didn't think I'd ever find anything again at all. Psychology today calls this role confusion. Who am I now that I am no longer who I thought I was? Where do I go from here? How do tongues work? It's full of questions with seemingly no answers. But there is a helpful way to think of all of this. Starting a new chapter. I had this really funny experience upon moving home where all of my friends were trying to get me back into their routine lives. My cat's gonna jump on the table. Ready? Oh no. Are you okay? Oh. I had been gone for so long and so much had changed. One of my closest friends invited me to a concert, and then a few days later, a food festival with a few of his friends. I met all these new people and was being shown around to all this stuff that was unfamiliar to me. I'd visit all these new parts of Cleveland that got built when I was gone and do all these things that I wasn't used to in parts of the town that I didn't know existed. I invited one of my friends and his wife to go out to an arcade and get some pizza for lunch afterwards, and they ended up bringing one of their friends that I had never met before, and we ended up going to a pizza place I had never tried. I was in all these places that were vaguely familiar to me and with people that I'd known for most of my life, but it was all kind of different, and I wasn't really used to a lot of it. The reason it's funny is because after the food festival with my friend, I had the realization that I was coming into an IRL version of New Game Plus. I had that familiar feeling you get when you've started New Game Plus, and I had all of the learnings of the previous 29 years, but I was being introduced to kind of a new world and a whole new experience of what I had once known. I knew the map, I still had my skill tree, but I had none of my inventory and all of the NPCs got reset. At first it felt ridiculous, but it did really feel like I was kind of starting life all over again. But the more I thought about it, the more I actually kind of liked it. I was no longer beholden to the person I was, and I was able to start from zero with building a new identity for myself. Now I won't pretend this is the case for everyone, but I do feel like most people in a grievous situation can take something from this. In my unique case, I was moving back in with my parents, so I didn't have any bills or any things I absolutely had to do. My cost of living was extremely low, so I had all this free time that I could use to do whatever I want, try to find new things. Spending it on my mental health was chief among them. While there was, and certainly still is, this feeling of existential dread and uncertainty, there was also a lot of freedom. There was also this ability to try a bunch of stuff I had never done before and see what I want to do next. I could even join the circus. I don't know why I'm on that analogy today. Sorry. I took everything I had learned from what I experienced and tried to use it as puzzle pieces to figure out what I want to do next. If you want to know a little bit more about how to use your situations as an opportunity to learn stuff and make a better life for yourself, watch my last video. Thanks. I knew I needed to be around people more and confide in my friends better. I knew I needed something that would occupy my hands and my mind for extended periods of time. I knew I needed something fulfilling that made me feel like I was contributing to the world in a meaningful way. I knew I had to resolve some of the harmful scripts I had in my mind about the way life is and who I am. I knew I needed to fucking lay in the grass and shut up for one goddamn minute. So with this newfound blank slate, I took all of the things I learned and set out to start a new life for myself, to move on from all of the hell that I went through. I tried all sorts of stuff. Writing on Substack, making furniture, video editing, SEO, learning Facebook advertising, writing music, reading books, meditating, writing intentional reflections in my journal. I ended up finding that I really enjoy making videos. Hello, hi, that's why I'm here. Hello, please subscribe and like the video channel, the do the stuff you're supposed to. Thanks. I knew I was losing my passion for design too, and I needed a new place to go. I started playing in a band again, which helped me get some of my social interaction and time with friends. I prioritized finding things to do that would keep me around people I love. I just kept trying stuff to see what I would want to move forward with. Truthfully, I'm still in this phase a little bit. I'm trying every day, little by little, to get through the grief and build back what I once had. I'm giving myself a new direction and trying to iron out what life looks like post-loss. I think this is really where it all culminates for everyone. You suffer this insanely huge loss and things are just this whirlwind of awful for a long time. But then the dust starts to settle and you start to notice some of the new insights you've gained. While all of this confusion and craziness has been going inside of you, yuck. While all of this craziness and confusion has been going on inside of you, you're gaining new insights and new learnings from it and realizing some things kind of in the background of your mind. You can take all of these things that you've learned once you kind of consciously reflect on them and figure out how to leverage them for the future and help you feel a little better moving on. If you suffer an identity loss like I did and many others do, you can try to intentionally use this as an opportunity to see it as a blank slate and reinvent yourself, to define what life looks like without this thing that you once had. It is not easy and it is not automatic, and you have to choose actively to do it and you have to work at it. The non-linear nature of grief means that some days you're gonna feel propelled forward and ready to take on the world and start anew, and other days you're gonna feel like Dookie and wanna lay in bed and just cry until you fall asleep for the next week. It's exhausting, but it's just the normal cycle of how it goes. The most important thing is being intentional, being aware. Understand that this process is a hell of a ride, and none of it makes sense, and nothing happens in order, and all of it feels bad, and there is no right or wrong way to experience it. My grieving process will probably look entirely different from yours, but that does not make yours any less real or valid. Everyone experiences grief differently, and the nuances of it vary dramatically. Instead of being prescriptive and saying like, oh, I'm in the anger phase now, understand that the anger phase is less of a phase and more of a symptom. It'll do whatever it feels like doing when it wants to do it. Grief is weird. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it can completely reshape who we are. But if we're self-aware enough and intentional enough, we can define what that reshaping looks like. I could not advise finding a good therapist anymore if you can afford it or figure out how to make it work. My therapist was the difference between letting this experience take me down to hell and keep me there and moving on from it and finding myself with hope at the other side. However grief looks like for you, you will get through it. Your feelings are your feelings, and you are absolutely valid for them, even if they're not the same or showing themselves as other people's do. None of this makes sense to you in the thick of it. You feel crazy or confused or humbled or angry or anything else. That's all perfectly normal. That's all in line with the stages of grief. What's important is you persevere and you do your best to keep yourself afloat by whatever healthy means possible. I believe in you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I appreciate you so much. I would love to hear your comments, maybe experiences that you've had. If you've experienced something similar to what I did and you feel like you've been seen, or maybe you've learned some insights about things that you'd like to share with the class and have a conversation down there, please do me a favor if you liked this and like the video and subscribe to the channel. I am trying to create an intentional community of people that like to talk about the heady stuff in life, but also like want it to be kind of fun and silly and, I don't know, enjoyable, I guess. Yeah, it means a lot that you've watched this. Grief is crazy, grief is hard, grief is weird, but I just wanted to share my experience and some of the learnings I had, and hopefully it helped you. I'm really very bad at ending videos. Goodness gracious. If you want to see some other stuff, YouTube thinks that you're gonna like one of these videos that's on screen right now. And otherwise, you have a good day. I love you. Bye.